Oh my God, it's her! She's lying out there on the street! In the biting cold of a Philadelphia winter night, he suddenly froze. On an old stone bench next to the bus stop, a young woman in a restaurant uniform lay curled up, clutching a hospital bill and a few crumpled coins in her hands. Her lips were turning purple, her face pale as ash. But what shocked him most was this. It was Valerie, the same woman who used to hand him coffee every morning with the gentlest smile. The same woman who had always been polite, patient, and thoughtful to the point that he had almost never really noticed her. Until now. Until this very moment. As she lay there, abandoned by life as if she had never existed at all, he finally understood sometimes we only truly see someone when they're about to disappear from this world. The bone-chilling cold of January seeped through every crack in the city's wind. The breeze blowing off the Delaware River carried no snow, yet it was enough to numb bare hands in minutes. Caleb Hawthorne stepped out of the hotel lobby in his heavy black overcoat, phone in hand, eyes still glued to unread emails. He had no idea that, in only a few steps, his world would shatter into pieces. Outside, the streets lay nearly deserted. A handful of cars drifted by, their headlights casting long shadows across the asphalt. Then he stopped. Not because of a shout, nor anything obvious, but because an impossible sight had appeared amidst the night's cold perfection. A woman small, her coat faded, heels worn to the threads, was slumped over on a curbside bench, fast asleep. Her server's uniform was frayed at the shoulders. Beside her lay a hospital bill creased over and over, its edges browned, gripped tightly in two numb hands. Caleb studied her, and his heart skipped a beat. Valerie. She'd worked at the little restaurant where he often had lunch, always quick, always remembering his order, polite and unobtrusive, never seeking attention, but never absent either. Once, when she brought his coffee late, he hadn't even looked up, only offered a curt reminder. She had simply bowed her head and apologized. Now, she lay there not from sleepiness, but from utter exhaustion, not resting, but abandoned, or, more precisely, forgotten by people like him. The bill in her hand displayed in bold letters, "Emergency transfer fees for pediatric patient Ricky Reyes." Caleb read that line as if slapped across the face. The name Reyes, one he'd heard Valerie mention once in passing to a coworker, "My little brother loves apple pie," had become the very reason she'd lost everything. Caleb could not look away, for in the silent figure before him, he saw a fragment of a memory he had long buried, a memory of a child trembling in an overcrowded hospital ward, his mother waiting in the corridor with fear in her eyes. And now, standing before him, was a young woman drawn back into the same fracture he had once walked away from. If someone had seen Caleb back then, would they have reached out, or would they too have passed by?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
Before becoming a silent shadow in that worn apron, Valerie Reyes was once a torch. She had eyes that sparkled in her journalism classes at Temple University and was chosen by her professor to read the live news bulletin on the student radio station, exactly where she dreamed her broadcasting career would begin. In that cramped studio, she sat up straight, her voice clear and confident. Valerie believed that if she worked hard long enough, doors would open, and her brother Ricky would live in a home with reliable electricity, no more blackouts over unpaid bills. But life rarely follows the diligent path. Her mother, a Dominican woman with wrinkled hands and a soft smile, collapsed suddenly from acute kidney failure. The emergency dialysis at North Philly Hospital became an unannounced financial nightmare. Valerie sold the laptop she used to edit news segments, her camera, even the single pair of heels she had worn for studio rehearsals. Instead of finishing her internship at the local television station as planned, she shelved her dreams. She took the night server shift at Mexicali's restaurant, wiped tables at a bakery in the early morning, and delivered meals via app at noon. Each day stretched into back-to-back shifts. Each night brought a few stolen hours of sleep in the campus library, the only place open all night and quiet enough to preserve the last bit of hope inside her. No one knew that Valerie once won Best Student Broadcaster. No one knew she'd written a podcast script on post-pandemic unemployment that professors praised. All they saw was a restaurant uniform, a tray of drinks, and a face so patient it almost vanished into the background. Then one day, Ricky, the little brother who always pretended he was fine, collapsed in class. Valerie got the call while on a delivery. She abandoned her route and sped to the hospital as if every siren had fallen silent. The doctor said he needed an emergency transfer for an MRI. Valerie nodded and signed the papers, despite the fee exceeding her 3-year savings. What followed was a series of missed deadlines. She forgot to tell a customer no sugar in their morning coffee. She botched a delivery. She arrived late on the very day she was assigned to supervise new staff. The restaurant let her go with a cold message, no questions asked, no context considered. She didn't argue. She just nodded, bowed her head, and walked away in silence. For 3 weeks, Valerie lived in the library. At first, she claimed a soft chair on the 4th floor hidden behind bookshelves. When security tightened night checks, she moved to the ground floor restroom, posing as an overnight student. But a library is not a home, and the sterile scent of bleach could not replace a warm blanket. Ricky asked why she never came home. Valerie lied. "I'm on overnight duty at the news station." He believed her. He always believed his sister was a superhero. Valerie never cried in public. She refused to let anyone witness her unraveling. Yet that night, sitting alone in the dark reading room beside computer monitors that had long since shut down, she looked at her reflection on the screen, and for the first time saw a woman who once shone bright, now dimming herself to save another. If you've ever had to give up a dream to keep someone you love alive, you'll understand that feeling. But how long did Valerie carry that weight alone? Dear beloved audience, please take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water before the next twist unfolds. Comment 1 if you enjoyed the story so we know you're still here. The next morning, Philadelphia was as cold as the night before. Yet inside Caleb, something had irrevocably shifted. Not because of a weather change, but because some hidden fracture within him, a silent, bloodless crack, yet as deep as an underground spring roused after long dormancy, had been awakened. Valerie was still asleep when Caleb summoned a private ambulance, then wrapped her in the wool blanket he always kept in his car's trunk, an item he hadn't touched since leaving the poor Westfield neighborhood. He wasn't sure what had driven him to act so swiftly. Perhaps it was the look in her eyes the night before, neither pleading nor angry, but empty in a way that frightened him. Or, perhaps, for the first time in years, he saw in someone else a mirror of himself, the son of a single mother who had done everything to keep him from going hungry. Caleb told no one that he cried in the back of that ambulance as it rolled through the city. No one needed to know. He wasn't one for words or seeking an audience. But that night, after he delivered Valerie to the hospital and quietly settled Ricky's outstanding bills, he stood in the hallway for hours, as if awaiting judgment from a court inside his own conscience. He thought of his mother, the woman who used to sell cookies door to door each winter to cover his tuition, with her little cart and deep-plaid scarf. She passed away quietly in a homeless shelter, just as Caleb was embarking on his first round of startup funding. He hadn't made it back in time. Instead, he sent an expensive wreath and carried on building his empire as though that memory had never existed. But Valerie, the girl unrelated to him by blood, had stirred what his mother bequeathed, unassuming kindness, and he knew that if he walked away this time, there would be no one left to preserve the human part of him. He never told anyone that he'd transferred full responsibility for Ricky's hospital fees into his own name. Nor did he inform Valerie that he'd reached out to a nonprofit to secure temporary housing for her and her brother. He acted, then slipped away quietly, as if offering an apology without words. Caleb didn't believe in fate, but he believed in second chances. He had once been the scorned child, expelled from class for not affording books. He had seen his mother weep when the landlord raised the rent. And today, when he looked at Valerie in her restaurant uniform, shivering in a hospital bed, he knew that the person least likely to ask for anything was the one most deserving of receiving everything. That evening, he returned home and opened the glass display case he had not touched in years. Inside was the only remaining photograph of his mother, its glass coated in a thin layer of dust. He wiped it gently and placed on the shelf a small note. "I've begun again, Mom. This time, not for success." Caleb didn't change for love. He wasn't moved by a single glance, nor did he form a relationship out of pity. He changed for a moral boundary, for a conscience that hadn't entirely died. And because if the world still held someone like Valerie brave yet unrecognized, then at least he would not turn his back again. But will Valerie accept this help, or will she choose to walk away to preserve the last shred of her pride? Dear beloved audience, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like and subscribe, and leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see you join us from around the world. No heralding background music announced the moment that would change a life. No flashbulbs, no fanfare, just a quiet morning after the storm. The Philadelphia sky was clearer than usual, and in a small hospital room, Valerie sat silently by the window, light gently touching her naturally loose hair, as if she'd never slept on a sidewalk just days before. Caleb entered without a sound. He carried no flowers, no files or contracts, only a clean coat, a thermos of warm water, and eyes no longer those of a businessman. He did not look at Valerie as someone in need of help. Rather, he regarded her as though she had just returned from a battle only she could have survived. She did not ask why he had come, nor did he offer an explanation. They simply sat there, two people who once passed each other like strangers, now seeing each other more clearly than any mirror ever could. On the day Valerie was discharged, Caleb came to pick her up himself. No driver, no gleaming luxury car, just an old, tidy SUV and a thick blanket in the trunk. Valerie expected he would take her to a shelter. Or worse, offer some kind job opportunity that still placed her underneath working as an assistant or cleaning an office where people spoke of humanity but never lived it. But he did none of that. They stopped in front of a building with no sign, only a small wooden plaque by the glass door. Open Desk Foundation, for the people who serve others. Inside was an open, bright space. Bulletin boards filled with thank you letters from delivery drivers, restaurant staff, and employees, people who had never had anywhere to share their gratitude before. Caleb handed her a slim packet. It was not an employment contract, but a proposal for a title, Director of Employee Support, a completely new role in the corporate structure. Her job would not be to manage, not to serve, but to listen. To register every smallest voice in a system long accustomed only to talking about performance, targets, and attrition. Valerie said nothing. Not because she doubted it, was because she could not believe such an offer still existed, a place where someone once deemed insignificant would be asked to join the table and design something greater than herself. Caleb did not pressure her to sign. He simply said he needed someone who understood what it felt like to be ignored, to be looked right through, to be judged by a uniform rather than a name. He needed someone who did not come from Harvard but from real life. On Valerie's first day in her new office, She did not wear a crisp white blouse or a business skirt. She wore her old coat, the only thing she still owned after everything, and carried a notebook. On its cover was a quote her mother once wrote, "No one is born to be someone else's background, but some choose to stand behind so others are not left out." No one in the office knew she had slept in the library, delivered food on a borrowed bicycle, or hid her tears when her brother was mentioned. Yet her gaze, quiet, resolute, made everyone fall silent as she passed by. She did not return to serve. She returned to change a system that once trampled people like her. And for the first time in years, Valerie smiled, not because someone needed her to perform, but because she was proud of the seat she now occupied. But will the others in the company, accustomed to the old standards, accept her? Or will this become a silent battle between the past and a new belief? No one told Valerie exactly where to start. She was assigned a small, windowless office and given an old computer wiped clean of data. But without any instructions, Valerie knew precisely what to do. Listen. Not just with her ears, but by attending to the silences between conversations, to the sidelong glances as she passed by, to the emails never sent directly but routed through a third party. She began by meeting the night shift staff, those who saw only the neon hum of hallways and the steady whir of the photocopier. The first was Maria, a custodian who'd worked here for 9 years, yet remained on a temporary contract without benefits. Maria spoke of mopping floors with unmarked chemicals, of being reprimanded for staining the tiles while trying to scrub away someone's dried blood. Next came Julian, a 19-year-old delivery driver, attending classes by day and working evenings to help his mother. His schedule was constantly reshuffled at the last minute, with no stability, and his pay docked for tardiness, even though every map showed traffic jams on his route. Story after story wove together, an invisible web taking shape. Valerie neither recorded nor photographed. She simply wrote by hand in her notebook. She realized that harm isn't always in what is screamed out. It's often in what is never said. At first, observing from afar, Caleb gradually sensed that the silence across the office floors was what was rotting the company from within. He and Valerie quietly reviewed the personnel files. They discovered an old basement level that once served as storage. When they unlocked its door, they found not documents but old desks, nameplates torn down, and a whiteboard bearing a half-erased message, "Listening program deferred." It was more than a basement. It was where memories lay frozen, a silent level, where welfare initiatives were shelved, complaint reports piled up and vanished, and hardworking employees were replaced without so much as a farewell. Standing in that room, Caleb felt as though he'd touched the darkest part of himself, something he had once believed he'd overcome. Valerie uncovered a folder with no sender listed. Inside were reports of internal ethical violations from years ago. Harassment via email, forced uncompensated overtime, performance evaluations based on race or origin. Each complaint was stamped under review, but no resolution ever followed. She knew she had entered a domain beyond mere responsibility. She was confronting a system that chose silence to protect its image, that buried faults deep so the surface could appear pristine. Valerie drafted her first report and sent it directly to Caleb. He did not reply immediately, but 3 days later, one of the mid-level managers abruptly resigned. The following week, internal employee surveys reappeared. Some staff forced polite smiles when they saw Valerie in the cafeteria. Others looked at her as if to say, "Don't stop now." Valerie did not change the world in a week, but she was digging in, patient as someone piecing together long-buried fragments of memory. And she understood that sometimes you must descend to the lowest, darkest levels to expose the disease eating away at what glitters on the surface. Will she have the strength to fight what has been buried so deeply in the organization's structure, or will she too be swallowed whole, vanishing without a trace, as so many before her did? No warning sign preceded it. It was just a morning like any other. Valerie's office mailbox held a nameless brown envelope with no postmark. Inside lay a small, unlabeled silver USB drive and a short note, "Only you dare to open this truth." Valerie didn't rush. She wasn't surprised. After months of probing the company's quieted recesses, she knew something was smoldering beneath, and now it had found its way to the surface. When she opened the USB, her screen filled with a series of disjointed video clips, anonymous footage but clear enough to freeze the room's air. The images were grainy, the camera angles low, yet the audio was chillingly real. The senior manager calling a female employee into his private office at midnight, his voice heavy, unauthorized shoulder touches. In another file, the budget approval for the building cleaning project played alongside an invoice from a luxury resort chain. A third clip captured two directors sneering as they talked about wiping the books before the quarterly audit. Valerie did not panic, but her heart grew heavy. These were no longer hidden shadows. This was proof truth in image and sound, undeniable and beyond a slick verbal defense. She sat for hours, categorizing and numbering each clip. Every video was a link in an organized chain of misconduct. What chilled her most was not the misdeeds themselves, but the attitude, the casual normalization of wrongdoing and the belief that no one would dare unmask them. She invited Caleb into the room once the daylight softened. He asked nothing. After watching, he said only, "Decide for yourself." Valerie did not trigger alarms. She systematized. She split the data into 3 sets. One sent to the company's external legal counsel under an independence agreement. One sent to the ethics board Caleb had just reinstated, and one intended for the public. 2 days later, in an unremarkable press conference room, Valerie sat before the cameras not as a PR spokesperson, but as a witness and accountable party. Her voice was calm, each word precise, neither accusatory nor appeasing. She revealed no details. She stated that the company had received evidence of serious internal ethical violations and that they would not wait to be exposed, but would confront the truth themselves. The clips were not broadcast en masse. They were delivered to 3 independent media oversight bodies. Caleb did not intervene. He let Valerie lead the entire process, and for the first time in the company's history, the board of directors sat together in genuine silence. Some employees leaked the story to the press, but this time the narrative was not distorted, because the person standing up to tell the truth had nothing to lose. No shares at stake, no position to vie for, no debts of loyalty to repay. Valerie knew she was entering dangerous territory. The looks in the hallways changed. Silence no longer signaled consent, but a fragile line between admiration and contempt. One coworker left a note on her desk, "Don't destroy the company for a few bad apples." An anonymous email urged her to be grateful for the chance you've been given. Valerie did not reply, but she recorded everything. Because if the company could conceal such major transgressions, then the smaller offenses implied threats. Emotional manipulation were the ropes tightening the noose around its ethical culture, bit by bit. When the truth is brought to light, will the organization be ready to change, or will it turn its back simply because the messenger once served tables? There was no warning sign. It was just another morning. The silence that followed the storm filled the company corridors, unfamiliar and heavy. Each footstep seemed to echo longer, not because the space had changed, but because the people within were beginning to view the world through a different lens. After the press conference, events unfolded as rapidly as gasping for air after a long sprint. The USB videos triggered a sweeping investigation. 4 suite executives were arrested, 2 resigned within a week, and the entire internal financial system was locked down for an independent audit. Valerie did not appear in the press. She declined interview requests, talk show invitations, and celebratory conferences. She returned to her small office, her notebook still on the desk, the door still nameless. Yet for the first time, no one avoided her gaze. Colleagues began to offer her quiet nods as they passed. Someone left a pastry on her desk, unsigned. A handwritten note slipped under her door read, "Thank you for seeing us." Caleb watched from the sidelines of the crisis, never claiming the spotlight. He appeared just once in a closed meeting with all shareholders to announce the company's restructuring. For the first time in its history, a nonprofit was invited to advise on organizational culture strategy. Valerie was offered a promotion, vice president of corporate ethics. She refused, not for lack of qualification, but because she knew that cultural change isn't about titles but principles. Instead, she proposed something simpler yet far more powerful: the Rooted Listening Program, where every employee, from drivers and custodians to specialists, would speak and be heard by their real name. Each quarter, an open forum dialogue is held across all levels of the company, with no podiums and no slide decks, just person to person. Valerie doesn't lead these sessions. She sits among them, taking notes and listening, just as she did on day one. Complaints gradually give way to suggestions. Vigilant looks turn into brief nods, enough to know that someone is there and will not walk away. 1 year after the investigation, the company headquarters held a modest ceremony, no fanfare, to announce a 40% increase in employee satisfaction. But what moved everyone most was not the statistic, but the speech given by Rosa, a janitor who had never spoken in public before, sharing that for the first time in 12 years she felt she was more than just a name on a uniform tag. After the ceremony, Caleb asked Valerie as they stood by the high-floor window, watching people stream out of the building, "How long will you stay?" Valerie paused. She gazed out at the city where she had once slept unprotected on its streets, where her dream of broadcasting had been extinguished, where she'd knelt on library floors, too afraid to call anyone family. She turned back and smiled, not like a victor, but like a survivor. Until the people who sweep away dust are no longer treated like the system itself. No one applauded, yet the room fell into a silence laden with meaning. Caleb said nothing more, for he understood. The dream Valerie carried did not require strategies or charts to explain. It required time and a community patient enough not to turn its back as truth reshapes its new form. And what about you? If given the chance to redefine how we treat one another at work, where would you begin? Life doesn't always hand out fair opportunities, but each of us can choose to live with kindness just as Valerie did. This story is not only about a woman who stood up to expose the truth, but also about the journey of a heart once wounded, now learning to heal itself and uplift an entire community. You don't need a lofty title. You don't need power. Sometimes, the only thing you need is the courage to refuse to turn your back on what's right. If you've ever felt overlooked, if you've ever fallen in silence, remember, your voice matters, and there is always someone like Valerie, ready to listen. Thank you for staying with us until the very end of this story. If any part of it spoke to you, please leave a comment below. I'm online every day. Don't forget to like and share with your loved ones in the US, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories filled with emotion like this. Do you dare to speak up for what's right when the whole system tells you to stay silent? Share your thoughts with us below.